Hello, I'm Tony Baker, and welcome to the very first episode of Purpose and Process. This podcast has been a long time in the making, and I'm thrilled to finally share it with you.
That is not a head conversation. That's a heart conversation. That is felt, not thought through.
And that is really what we're paid for as commercial artists, is to be able to capture that.
My creativity is in the problem solving. The difference was the taking pictures versus making pictures.
Today, my guest is Timothy Hogan, a tabletop director and stills photographer living in Ojai, California, and shooting in a studio out of Los Angeles. Tim is recognized as one of the top specialists in tabletop cinematography today, known for his bold, minimalist style and technical precision. He's collaborated with many luxury brands and top agencies worldwide, crafting stunning visuals for major campaigns, some of which you've likely seen a lot. Beyond his award-winning work featured in industry powerhouse publications like Communication Arts and Graphice, just to name a couple, Tim is also a sought-after speaker at events like Photokina, IMA's Impact Conference, and where I met Tim for the first time at the Henry Stewart Creative Operations Forum. In our conversation today, we dive into Tim's innovative and progressive approach to in-camera effects in an era dominated by CGI and AI visuals. And we discuss his passion for pushing the boundaries of motion control filmmaking. We dive into Tim's main driver, specifically his love for tackling big challenges and what happens when that doesn't go as planned. He is refreshingly candid about the highs and lows of his journey, sharing hard-earned successes and the tough failures that taught him lessons that he carries to this day. Tim has joined us for this recording session as he is also overseeing a pre-light for one of his major clients, so I'm extra thankful for his time and attention today. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Timothy Hogan. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Timothy Hogan, welcome.
We made it.
We made it at long last. So it's fair to say you're best known for your motion and stills work that has both a technical precision and a luxury aesthetic. Who are you working for these days?
A lot in the beverage space. The splashes, liquids, dynamics is a big feature of ours. Fair amount of jewelry work, shiny things, and really anything that's a challenge. I think that's a big theme of mine, is that like if it's difficult and it gets my brain thinking and kind of gets me noodling on it, then I'm interested in doing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily matter what the subject matter is.
Yeah.
For me anyways.
That's great. As photographers, we're allowed to sort of lose ourselves and discover things within the work.
Yeah. And in that, I feel like there's almost nothing worse than getting a brief that you've done a million times.
Yeah.
Because then you're just, in some ways, you're trying to put a spin on it, but in some ways you also can't help but phone it in a little bit. So there's always something in this, and I'm sure we'll get into it, this discovery in a problem-solving side of things. Mm-hmm. That's the fun part for me.
So I came across you when you were speaking at a recent industry event, and it was about photo studio operations. That was the specific room that we were in. And we were hearing things about technical, we were hearing things about process, and then here you show up and you're telling a very personal story. And in fact, you started using a word that I use a lot, and that is your thread. And you even had this really beautiful graphic up with it, and it made sense. And what I was really drawn to was you were sharing both your successes and some challenges, and maybe even some failures along the way.
Some big failures.
That shaped you.
Yeah.
But it all starts back. I know that you started that story, and you shared with the crowd, and you even had some images.
Oh, my next door neighbor. Okay. Back in the day, he was my next door neighbor, and I always used to take things apart in the driveway. I think in that picture, I'm taking apart like a toy lawnmower. Putting things back together was not necessarily my strength, but I liked the taking things apart side.
So it was a curiosity about how things work, or a curiosity, or just youthful destruction?
Probably a combination of both, to be honest. Some mess making in the process. I think it was finding out how things work, finding out how things went together, the construction of things, deconstructing that, and just the tactile, tactile nature of like working with tools and working with your hands. And of course, you don't know any of those things when you're young, right? Especially not when you're like however many, I'm probably 3 or 4 in that picture, maybe 4 or something like that. Yeah. But that element of doing things and working with my hands and the physicality of things has always been super important.
Yeah, and the physicality of things, because you are into skateboarding and surfing and other, strenuous, agile sort of activities. In fact, you showed one picture where you guys are building a half pipe.
Oh yeah, and a little mini ramp in my backyard.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. So really fun with that. So how does that evolve into being creative? Do you remember?
I mean, the photography part was, finding photography was a total guess, absolute guess. I was looking at colleges. I ended up going to Syracuse, and I went into the computer lab, and they were doing early CGI, so image-based. They called it ray tracing back in the day.
That's right. That's right.
Holding up the polished metal ball and it's seeing the world around you. I think that was the image on the screen there. And I was just like, I don't want to sit at a computer. Like, I just can't do it. I still can't do it. And I was like, I don't know what I want to do anymore. And I was looking through a course book, newsprint pages. Here's all the courses at Syracuse, flipping through, and photojournalism. I was like, oh, okay. And it was just kind of like, well, let me try that.
So let's talk about that. So you get in,
Yeah.
because photojournalism, it might be on the other side of the spectrum from what you're doing now. Tell me about that. How did you find PhotoJ? And
so there was two paths. There was PhotoJ and there was illustration photography. And starting out in PhotoJ, I was going to protests in Albany and, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he did some stuff for the Daily Orange, the school newspaper, and all black and white film, obviously in those days, 35 millimeter, and it was okay. I was doing stuff. I was in the darkroom, but the difference was the taking pictures versus making pictures.
yes, yeah,
So you're an observer. You're butting your lens into somebody's, a lot of times butting your lens into somebody's not so awesome moment.
that's right.
Yeah, and I was just like, I don't know about this. Like, still in the darkroom, got addicted to that magic really, really early on, and being in the darkroom and watching prints come up. I can still smell the fixer, miss those days.
It's so funny because I too had my darkroom moment.
Yeah.
And I often talk about this with a friend of mine. It's that darkroom moment for photographers is a lot like people of the generation before us seeing the Beatles on TV for the first time and becoming musicians. Right? It's that something happens. You are not the same person that you were 5 minutes ago, and you have to take that path.
The alchemy of that thing coming up, literally being a blank piece of paper, and then all of a sudden this thing appears on it, and you're like,
yeah,
what? And then all of the, and then you realize you're really bad at it, and all the improvement stuff that happens, as you're learning the craft side of it. But that first magic moment, and the kind of single-natured focus of being in that dark room. That's all you're doing.
That's all you're doing.
And I'm grateful for that too, because I think there's a patience that's learned in there, and there's also, later on in school, I was into color printing, and so learning color through that repetition process in a way that if you're on the computer and you're just moving sliders back and forth, you don't have.
That's
So
right.
I have a really deep understanding and knowledge of color.
Yeah.
Getting feedback right after it's either right or it's wrong, or how do I fix it? Like, that is just ingrained, over and over and over of practice.
Well, I want to move into, this is a perfect segue. I want to move into talking about, move through maybe a little bit of the presentation that you had given when you and I first met, and talk a little bit about your career and moving through.
Yeah.
So get out of college. Okay, I'm going to be a photographer.
Yep.
What's next?
Moved to New York, like y'all do.
And how old were you when you moved to New York?
I was, I think, 21.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I had turned 21 senior year, so moved right after that. Before that, though, I worked at a camera store in East Hartford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Summers. And met all the photographers there and started assisting a lot of the industrial photographers and corporate photographers in Hartford area before that. And then junior year, I think did a summer in New York assisting a fashion photographer, Jeff Licata, who's also a Syracuse grad. And and then, moved to New York and was like, all right, here we go. God, I was, in over my head in some ways, but what a, great and difficult learning experience that was.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you jump in the deep end of the rapids.
And man, you had to be on it. There was
Oh,
no
that's right.
there was no,
Yeah.
sitting on your phone. Oh, what's going on? You were expected to, if you didn't hand Jeff all Pentax 6.7, we're getting nerdy for a second here, but
Sure.
all Pentax 6.7 fashion film, if you didn't hand Jeff a new camera when he was ready for it, he would just stare at the model and snap his fingers at you.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
While you were fumbling trying to get the roll loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that you had to be on it. On it.
Yeah. So you start assisting.
Yeah.
And then what's next?
Start assisting, always had an impatient streak about me.
Yeah.
So, was assisting freelance, never full-time for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I assisted for like a year, got my first studio in New York on 29th Street, room maybe about this size. Like if we wanted to shoot, I did a lot of beauty back then. If we wanted to shoot, we had to move the furniture out, small space in a crappy building. And
But you make it work somehow.
just started shooting. I mean, rent got paid on credit cards. It was like, if I'm going to do this, here we go, type of thing. And just, it's funny, I've just been doing a lot of work on my archive and going back and seeing images that I shot early on. And it was a little bit of a trip through memory lane there, like looking at stuff and talk about being all in. I mean, every time I did a beauty test, right, I spent $4,000 or $5,000 on film and processing.
Yeah.
So you had to be you kind of had to be all in.
Yeah. You had to know that the big payoff was coming. Because you're doing that multi-$1,000 test multiple times.
Oh yeah, over and over and over.
Over
again.
and over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so moving on, you start to get clients a little bit.
Yeah.
You said that you'd been shooting beauty, fashion, things like that. So is that where you started and then it switched over to more of what you're doing now? How gradual was that shift?
It was kind of a combination. I started, the still life thing started in Syracuse because I could be very independent. I could be walking to the studio and not knowing what I was going to shoot and smash pack of Marlboro cigarettes on the street, pick that up and do a found object thing with it. It was so easy to just find stuff to put together. And then, so the still life stuff started first because I could be independent and I could just go in the studio and noodle and just do my thing. Most of the time it was solo. It wasn't crews. It's funny. A lot of that kind of still hangs on to this day, that just kind of, I just want to be in my zone, not talking with people, just kind of like, the dark room to the studio to the thing, like that all is a thread that kind of continues to this day.
Yeah. And being young and having a lot of energy and at least believing that you know which direction to go, especially like when you talk about things like found objects, like a cigarette pack. I think as young photographers, what we were trying to do is show that our point of view was valid as well. Here is a different way to look at this world that we all take for granted.
Yes.
Can we stop? Can we slow down just a little bit? These things
very good point.
These things that we take for granted actually do have real impact. They can make a difference if we maybe just slow down and look a little deeper.
I like the noticing part of that, but that's one of the reasons I like, my personal work, some of the landscape photography and travel stuff. Completely different than the constructed things that we do in studio, but it's all about there's that moment when everything was right and you stumbled upon it and like that thing I saw, I need to make that timeless in a way.
Yeah.
Like, I need to capture that.
Yeah. Moving into your career, you start to get work, you start to build a client roster. You're still in New York. Walk me through that period.
I assisted for like a year. And that's when that impatience thing struck. It was just kind of like, trying to get clients, shooting during, assisting during the day, shooting at night, repeat, just to the point of just sheer exhaustion.
When did New York come to an end? What was the transition and what was after that?
That was, the moment it shifted was that 08 financial crisis. Again, same thing. 08, 07, 08, I had my biggest year ever. We were working all the time. I built out a big studio on Jewel Street in Brooklyn, in like Greenpoint area, which is still there. I looked it up.
At that point, you're doing fully the still life and maybe beginning to get into motion.
Yeah, I shot a little bit of motion back then, and I did a couple projects for Tommy Hilfiger and a couple, tests, and then I was like, I don't like shooting motion, and then didn't shoot motion for like 10 years.
Yeah. And so coming out of New York,
Yeah,
where did you end up?
I went from studio in Jewel Street, apartment in Bed-Stuy, and then bounced to Santa Monica. So how was that first shift? Yeah.
That's big.
Bed-Stuy to Santa Monica.
Yeah. So you come to Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And where do we go from there?
And then in Santa Monica, kind of same thing. I was going through a pretty not super fun divorce at the time, like right after moving out to LA. And again, burnout, couldn't, got a studio up at Bergamot Station there, kind of art gallery / studio thing. Ran it as an art gallery for a little while with a good friend, Ledoux. So we tried to get that going. But ultimately, I didn't have much gas left in the tank from New York.
Sure.
It was very, it was phoned in. It was survival. It was just enough to keep it simmering. So, you can't run away from, wherever you go, there you are. You can't, just a change of place doesn't really change anything.
Yeah. We all find that out the hard way.
I know, really. You're like, I'm going to go do this and it'll be different. No, it won't. No. Sorry. It's just going to be sunnier out, so you're going to be in a better mood.
Yeah.
That's all. But you're still going to be burnt out as hell.
Yeah.
So, that did not solve my burnout moving from New York to LA. Mm-hmm. And, I phoned it in for a bunch of years.
So the first time I heard of your name was at a studio called Conveyor that I worked with a team out of San Francisco. Tell me a little bit about Conveyor.
Yeah, so Conveyor was born out of a business incubator program called 10,000 Small Businesses. Basically like a little mini MBA. Yeah. You went in and you took your business and you said, all right, how do I scale this? And the whole point was to create jobs in the community. Yeah. And so it was all about scaling a business. So you wrote an opportunity plan as opposed to a business plan. So like, here's this thing and here's an opportunity. And I saw the writing on the wall with e-commerce. Yes. And then my aesthetic side of it was like, e-commerce photography is crap. And a lot of it was back then. I feel like it's leveled up a lot since then. So there were so many things that like I was right about in terms of seeing the writing on the wall and all that kind of stuff about. It was like early days of a boutique style e-commerce agency. Yes. Timing was right. There was so many things that were right in that, and there were also so many things that were just so wrong.
So talk to me about that for just a little bit. Was it wrong because of the industry? Were you ahead of your time? Were you just thinking about it maybe in a way that wasn't quite spot on?
I think it wasn't spot on for me. In the way, first off, I didn't know how to lead or manage people. Still burnt out at that time too. Yeah. So that's the part of being burnt out and now burnt out and bad at my job.
Yeah, and when you're burnt out, the huge successes, while you should celebrate them, really it's just a relief.
Oh, it didn't.
And any other failures are earth-shattering when you're in that state. It's not a good place to be.
It was. Yeah, the failures, the overhead, the salaries, it was crushing. Ooh, we got to win. That win lasted and that was a bunch of feedback I got from people who worked with me. It was like, we never celebrate anything. We never celebrate any wins. Yeah. I'm not the best at that anyways. It's always just like, okay, what's next? But in that context, the wins would be a,
Yeah.
Or boop, as the heartbeat went down. It just, it wasn't enough. And it, bringing it back to the threads idea, it was the opposite of my makeup, my authenticity in why I got into the business and why, all of those whys around photography and, my threads, which I'm sure we'll get into, the concept of threads are the things that as a creative or anybody have kind of held true for your entire career, to be honest, your entire existence.
Right. Often unnoticed.
And I think that's why I wanted to bring that concept of threads up is that it requires a little bit of digging to figure out what your threads are. And everybody has them.
Yeah.
So it requires a little bit of digging so that you know when you're off it, when you're holding on to the thread or when you're not. When
Yeah.
you've let go of it.
Yeah. And in the graphic that you created, it's, there are, actually, it looks like there are multiple threads
Yes.
going through it that are all tied around. And I think that's very apt. That so many of us, myself included, think of it, it's just a singular thread that, everything will wrap itself around. But I love the illustration that you had created. And then I think about these times, at least my interpretation of that graphic was suddenly there's this massive knot in the middle of it where all the threads are still there, but they're very tangled.
Yeah.
They're going in multiple directions,
Yeah.
usually the wrong direction or in circles.
In circles. I think the circular part is a really important part
and,
of that. Yeah.
And it was while you were talking about that, there was a moment in front of that large group of people talking about very technical and business-oriented things that you got real in a way that most people are scared to do. But it felt so genuine, and that's when I really internally, mentally leaned in and thought, I've got to get to know this guy. And what my experience was, you were talking about this really challenging time.
Yeah.
And you had said, and I'm paraphrasing, but you had said, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I need to apologize for that. And the energy in the room, at least for me, shifted because you dropped into Timothy. You dropped into the person that you really are in front of a large group of people. And then you went on after kind of a blanket apology that was very sincere. You said, you pointed out a person who is a good friend of mine, who I was sitting right next to, and you said, and I am sorry, and looked them right in the eye. And the room shut down. It paused, as it should have. And I felt energy from my friend. I felt it coming off the stage, and it filled the room. And it's in those conferences that you rarely ever get a glimpse of authenticity. And it was palpable in the room that day. And I think it just goes a long way in showing that we all have victories and we all have challenges and even defeats. And here in this very technical conference, you were talking about probably the most important thing beyond the success of any company or any endeavor. You were talking about the foundations that actually make those things possible. And thank you for doing that. I think we all need to do that a little bit more. But you were in that knot of threads. Mm-hmm. It's a learning period. I often talk about in a lot of situations, we're dissatisfied with the outcome, which propels us to do better. So it's this necessary dissatisfaction. All of human creation is all about necessary dissatisfaction. This isn't good enough. It needs to be better.
Yep.
We're not happy where we are. This isn't good. What's over the next hilltop? Constantly searching. And so what you went on to explain was after this sort of knotted thread, it began to untie itself. And then you moved into the next phase of your life and career and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So that, that knotted period, that summarizes Conveyor in that time period, that 4 or 5 years of my life where making mistakes by the boatload and in some ways also not learning from them in that moment. I didn't have the bandwidth necessarily.
Yeah.
And so my threads are building, beauty, so creating things of beauty, and discovery, right? Those are the things that, in reflection, I've identified as being the threads that keep my career going. So in an e-commerce studio, building, I loved building the studio and some of the processes and stuff. Beauty, we're doing e-commerce photography. And discovery, not really any in that sense.
Beyond the efficiencies, how do you build this machine to run really efficiently?
And then and all of those, and I would just create problems for myself to discover and figure out, as opposed to that works well enough, just let it go.
It's my understanding that it's after Conveyor and all of the challenges there that you move into this place where you start creating different types of imagery, really powerful, really focusing in on this technical precision, this marriage of that with luxury, making these really impactful images that sort of have their own gravity. It's really attractive, no matter what. You're creating stills and moving imagery that you have to stop and look at.
Yeah, that is the goal, and that's the coming back to the thread. So after all of the, drama around conveyor and the changing of staff and this, that, and the other thing, and trying it, giving it another go at the end of COVID and bringing on new people.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the people and that whole thing.
Yeah.
Once I was like, enough. We lost our major client. That was the thing that kept it going. Yeah. And like you just did, the sigh of relief mixed with finally I get to put the nail in this coffin and say I'm done. I can't. Yeah. It's getting to the end of something, and you've done it over and over again, thinking it will be different.
Right.
Right. And then at some point you're just like,
yeah,
I can't. Like my soul couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah. But at the same time, what is happening, and all this stuff happens in hindsight, is this growth of wisdom, right? Because at its core, I think at the very foundational level of wisdom, it's simply pattern recognition.
Yes.
Right? And it's the knowledge of, I've seen this before, married with, and I know what to do. And I know why to do it. Maybe not this specific way, but I know why to do it so that we get the outcome that we're looking for. Yeah. So that's, again, wisdom takes a long time to unpack. It's usually, it has to process.
Yeah, because wisdom doesn't come from not making the mistakes. It only comes from the flip side of it.
It just
It only comes from the flip side of it. Like,
it just
you
sucks.
Can't have wisdom without, otherwise it's just some intellectualized. It's not wisdom.
Yeah.
You have to have the visceral experience of the fuck ups to get that real, learned, felt, embodied knowledge that goes, yeah, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah. And that's the difference between, starting out as a new commercial artist or beginning to do creative things professionally, and then being seasoned at it is certainly there's that pattern recognition there, the building of wisdom. But there is this resonance. You begin to make your decisions more slowly, right, in a more measured pace, partly because of wisdom, partly because of experience in there. That is certainly a part of wisdom, but also just the acknowledgement that I don't want to do that anymore, and I'm going to slow my roll just a little bit.
Yeah, and that is not a head conversation. That's a heart conversation. Yeah, that is felt, not thought through. Mm-hmm. Of that moment when you've reached that tipping point, and in the past your head would go, oh, but you should give it another go.
Yeah,
or you should try this way, or what if you, whatever.
Yeah.
Until the end of time. And then at some point your heart, that's the wisdom, I think, is your heart kind of speaks up and goes, hey, by the way, so how about we not do that again?
Right.
Let's reconvene here, and find what, and I think that's the part, the wisdom part of Conveyor that, again, glad I went through it, and I wouldn't be where I am now without having gone through that.
Yeah.
Is that in a lot of ways I knew I shouldn't be doing it, but I was doing it anyways.
Sure. Yeah. And you don't want to give into what feels like failure. You can right the ship somehow.
Somehow I'll fix it. Somehow I'll figure it out. Somehow, but in the back of my, my heart the whole time was never in it.
Yeah. It was an intellectual exercise.
It was an intellectual exercise. It was a should. It was a, every time I hear the word scale now, especially for artists, my eyes roll back in their head. It's just
tough.
like,
because scaling is its own talent. It's its own skill set.
Oh yeah,
and
not mine.
Yeah, and you can you can use that in building widgets or creating imagery or content or assets. But it takes it into this realm of you're getting away from the beauty part. You're getting away from the things that actually mean something. And I'm going to bring you back to something that you were talking about just a few minutes ago, in that feeling. You were talking about feeling it with your heart. Yep. So I want to talk about your process now. Like you're in a pre-light right now. You're gonna leave the chair and go really dig in again. And what you are doing when you're creating these incredible moving imagery and these very luxurious types of imagery, whether it's stills or motion, there is a feeling you're going for.
Mm-hmm.
This, we talked about the necessary dissatisfaction. This isn't good enough. I'm going to keep pushing.
Yep.
Can you describe what it is that you're trying to feel when you know that you've got it and you can move on?
Ooh, what I'm trying to feel. It's kind of like, so, just to wrap out the conveyor story, at the end of that, right, is like once I finally was like started listening to my heart a little bit more, it was just like, all right, what are the things that I'm good at? And then all of a sudden motion came back onto the scene. I got asked to do a motion project for a client of mine, and I was like, oh, here's an opportunity. And then those images that we shot with the Phantom, so 1,000 frames a second,
Right.
those show up on the screen. And all of a sudden I'm back in the darkroom. There's surprise, there's wonder, there's all of these discovery, making. It's beautiful, it's surprise, it happens like this, and you're like, I didn't even see that. And then it unfolds, that bubble popping, in that, right?
Yeah.
That visual. It's just like, whoa. And it was like, getting poured over the head with a bucket of ice water. It was like, oh,
this is
there, we're back. Like that's why, that's what I hadn't been doing. So to bring it back to your question of like, what's the feeling that you're looking for? That's the feeling. If I look at it and I see it on the monitor or whatever, and I'm like, oh, like it's got discovery, it's got building, it's got, it's got beauty mixed in with it.
Yeah.
That for me, then I chalk that up as successful.
Yeah. And that is really what we're paid for as commercial artists, is to be able to capture that so that the viewer stops their crazy life for 2 seconds and pays attention to this imagery. And hopefully, what our clients hope for is that they tie that feeling while they've shut everything else out for 2 seconds. They have felt something and it's associated with this brand name, right? That is what we do as commercial artists.
Yeah.
But it all does begin with feeling it, not thinking it, and not realizing this intellectual exercise has been successful. It is feeling it that has allowed us to hang our shingle.
Yeah, and all of that energy put into doing e-commerce photos versus that energy channeled into building images that that give me that energy. So there's a flywheel that happens right there.
Flywheel, that's the word.
Is you're giving that energy, and the work that you're making is giving it back to you.
Yeah, that's so good. You want to get the feeling back
And then
from
you're
it.
like, oh, and I want more of that.
And then suddenly it's worth it. Oh, this is why I'm working so hard. This is why I'm putting myself through this.
This is, it's worth spending 4 hours a day in the car driving back and forth from Ojai. I don't do it every day because I'd lose my mind. But, spending a lot of time in the car, it's back to that no questions asked from New York. Maybe not to, because I'm not 20 years old anymore. Maybe not to that level. But it's back to that no questions asked. What do I need to do?
The difference between Tim in his early 20s and now is there is a resonant frequency that you are tuned to that you may have stumbled across back then, but you're still looking.
I didn't know about it then. Yeah, I didn't know the wisdom of having it versus not having it.
Yeah. And now is it fair to say that your antenna is more tuned to that
Absolutely.
resonant frequency?
Absolutely.
Like
I know the second I'm doing something that is off frequency.
Yeah.
And I know, and because I can feel it also in the energy, like that that flywheel. Again, it's energizing, not depleting.
Yeah.
I can work my butt off now, and I'm tired. Especially after a shoot, call them shoot hangovers, right? You're like, because you've just given it your all. But ultimately, it's coming back to you, and you're like, more. And one of the things you said that I want to distinguish, that never good enough thing.
Yeah, necessary dissatisfaction.
There's potentially a negative tone about that, and I want to be clear that it's not that, oh, this isn't good enough. It's not that downward spiral of
Yeah,
never
it's
good enough.
this is close, but it's not there yet.
It's the striving for where I want to go. This coach Logan that I work with, he has a thing called Hold the Standard, and this is based off his gym Deuce in Venice here.
Yeah.
And holding the standard is basically you're here, you want to be here, right? So you're at level X, you want to be at level Z.
Yeah.
You're responsible for that gap. That's it.
Yeah.
You're responsible for that.
Yeah.
And that is that is an uplifting responsibility.
Yeah.
That you can dig into and you can grab onto and you can, have, agency over that gap.
Yeah.
It's not, this is never good enough. It's crap.
Right.
In that connotation of never good enough.
Yeah.
So it's never good enough, but I see where I want to go and I'm responsible for the work to get there.
Yeah. It's akin to something I talk a lot about with teams and clients in that, you want to keep your traction.
Yeah.
Like you're going to work really hard to get a fraction of an inch up the hill. You can't slide back down.
Right.
Or if you do, and everybody does, the feeling of that.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh, I got 2 steps, but I slid back 5. Okay. We're just gonna keep pushing it back up the
and
hill.
now you're maybe responsible for a little bit bigger gap now if you backslid a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Whole thing about backsliding is you recognizing when you backslid and doing the work. That's also the practice.
Yeah. So as you move forward, what are you looking to do? As we sit here now and we can think about there's what you're actually doing literally today in the studio just next door.
Yeah.
But what does the future look like? Where do you think this could go for you? What's next?
Shooting motion with the robots, reinserting myself in this space. Again, the not New York energy, but close type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Putting myself out there again. It's almost this coming home type of feeling with regards to the career, where I was, from young and energetic to burnt out to like that resonance of, let's just see where this goes. If I can tune into the resonance and I can
use your wisdom.
Yeah. Keep refining it.
Yeah.
And, surrounding myself with people who share that value and want to build that, whether that's agents or production companies or, or the crew we work with on a day in, day out basis, like having everybody rowing in the same direction is really good. But just kind of like, let's see where it goes. As long as I'm in line with those threads, that frequency, whatever that is, it's just like, let's go. Let's see what we can do. So there's this, the coming home aspect is this, now that the, resonance, now that it's been identified, the frequency's been identified.
Yes.
How do we keep that going?
Yeah.
And, it's not the outcome. It's just the process. It's all right. Like, what's next? Where's that curiosity? What are we going to try? What are we going to, what crazy rig are we going to build that's just, that is going to give us that magic or where can we bring that aesthetic outside? And, I just pitched a client on some stuff outside, lifestyle stuff that's more storytelling, cinematic stills. Okay, let's follow that. Does it have the resonance? If it has that frequency, then let's go.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't have that frequency, I keep using resonance, so it's not the word, but if it doesn't have that frequency, then maybe that's not the path.
Yeah. Or how do we tune this radio? How
do we take out that resonance so that all of a sudden there's harmony and we can go.
That's a big.
So what needs to shift?
Yeah.
To get on that track.
So Tim, I notice a big difference between your commercial work, the very, again, here comes this word, luxurious, liquid, slow motion, very tactile, really draws your eye in for a specific reason, much more commercial. And your personal work, specifically around, say, the vintage baseball series and the Fins series around the graphic nature of surfboards.
Yep.
What I see when I look at your very commercial work, it is big, it's bombastic, It is meant to be awe-inspiring, showing this luxurious beauty of these things and really drawing you in as an overarching feeling, right? That's what I feel in my chest when I look at it.
Yep.
And then when you move into your very personal series about baseball, vintage baseball, and the Finn's series with surfboards, it's very different, but the power still comes through. It's very graphic in nature. With your commercial work, I see you setting big scenes, setting worlds that people want to be in, but your personal work is on the opposite side of that, is that you want to live with something, a singular object, be able to, almost in a scientific way, look at it, analyze it, learn from it.
Yeah.
And what really drew me to it was I saw similarities in imagery that I was really drawn to, especially in the baseball series, with things that I've seen and things that I've worked on in the past with vintage musical instruments.
Oh, cool.
In that this singular object has a history.
Yeah.
It has a vast history, right? So if it's the baseball gloves, which are incredible across the early period of professional baseball, how many catches, right? How many hundreds of thousands of catches has this glove? How many bags has it been thrown in for long journeys? How many times has this been oiled up? How many times has it been abused on the field? Similar to a musical instrument, how many times has this been played? What songs have been written on this? What experience has that actually had? Talk to me a little bit about that. Do you feel like this pendulum swing, I'll refer to it as, is that a conscious effort?
No, and I've never thought about it in that contrasty way before. I've thought about it in terms of, slick and shiny and luxury, and I'm not. I mean, I wear the same jeans and the same T-shirt all the time. Like, I'm not that flashy type of thing. I think the personal work, it's much slower, as you mentioned. Like, it is intentionally slow. It is meant, like you said, to have people, meant to be printed big, meant to be stop, stare at it, contrast it with its neighbors. It's almost designed for contemplation. I don't think I think about it like that, but like, I want to look at a composition of surfboard fins and have all those exact same questions that you have about baseball. I'm not necessarily a baseball fan, which is hilarious.
Interesting.
Other than go Red Sox and what about the Yankees. So for the surfboard fins, it's like, what waves, what boards has that been on? Like who made it? Why did they make it? On and on and on.
Yeah.
The Thomas Fire series, the trees surrounding Ojai.
Yes.
It's about studying and contrasting that relationship between, a week after the fire and a year after the fire.
Yeah.
There's a contemplative nature to, I think, all of the things that I, those kind of like study-based projects, which they're right. I mean, the Finn project was a, Bernard Hewlett Becker, inspired thing where you're like, it's designed to be compared and contrasted with its neighbors. Like, that's part of the process. And then the technique of it goes away to where, yes, it's lit and it's brought out all the textures and all that kind of stuff, but it's not necessarily a photographic technique there.
Yeah. In fact, I would say, again, it's in direct contrast to the very commercial work that you do, that an educated guest says it looks like one source. It's white background.
Yep.
It is bringing out, it's the phrase that I use a lot, it's bringing out the highest visual potential of this object.
Yes.
And it's helping tell its full story almost to the point that each time you look at it, you can see something different. Mm-hmm. And it is so simple that it lends it integrity.
Yeah. Yeah. Because without the simplicity, it would be, if there was photographic technique, if there was some, I don't know, like effect or something like that, it ruins the whole.
Well, yeah. And it's a big theme. It's a thread of mine that I really appreciate simple done well.
Yeah.
Because there is nothing to hide behind.
Yeah.
It either works or it doesn't. It is very binary.
Yes.
And both of those series, I think, as individual series, and you you push into those individual images in each of those series, it holds weight.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such beautiful stuff. Thank you for creating all
Yeah,
that.
I enjoyed each one of those because it's a discovery process for me as well. In even not being a baseball fan, seeing an object for its object's sake, not having to be a baseball fan.
Well, I think that's the strength in that series is the fact that you weren't trying to help tell the story that's already been told. You were telling your own story, just from a completely visual standpoint.
There's something that intrigued me about that. It was an ESPN story that I went and met Jim, who owns a bunch of the gloves that we shot.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That was a communication arts award for that story. And then it was like, oh, there's more. Like, let's pull this thread. Where's the thread on this sweater go? And let's figure this out. I think that the contemplative nature of those series, I think it's personal. It's more in line with how I'm wired.
Yeah.
I'm not big, bombastic. I love that word that you used. It's quieter, it's contained, it's distilled down once we get into those other images that I shared.
Yeah.
Like there's one image that's just like, it doesn't need anything else. It's perfect as it is.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I think that does it. Man, thank you so much for today.
Good. Thank you for having me, and honored. It was great.
Until next time.
All right. Cool. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
See you soon.